Keanu Reeves stood quietly in the first-class line, his unassuming presence unnoticed by most. But when an entitled woman blocked his path, what happened next left everyone speechless. A bustling airport, travelers rushing to their gates, announcements echoing overhead. Amid the chaos, a man stands quietly in line for first-class boarding. He's dressed simply, jeans, a plain jacket, and a modest backpack slung over his shoulder. To most, he seems like just another passenger. But this isn't just anyone. This is Keanu Reeves, the Hollywood star known not just for his iconic roles, but also for his humility and down-to-earth nature. Keanu moves forward as the gate attendant calls for first-class passengers. But before he can step through, a sharply dressed woman blocks his way. She's carrying an expensive designer bag and exudes an air of impatience. Her voice cuts through the noise, sharp and condescending. "Excuse me," she says. "This line is for first-class passengers only." Keanu pauses, momentarily taken aback. He doesn't speak, but his calm demeanor remains unchanged. The woman's assumption lingers in the air, heavy and awkward. Others in line glance at the scene, sensing the tension but choosing to stay silent. What happens next is a story you won't believe. Stay with us to see how Keanu's quiet grace turns this moment into something unforgettable. The woman's words hung in the air, her tone dripping with entitlement. Keanu tilted his head slightly, his calm eyes meeting hers. He didn't respond right away, giving her a moment to reconsider her assumptions. But she didn't. "This line is for first-class passengers," she repeated, more firmly this time, as if her emphasis would make her point clearer. Her eyes scanned him, his simple clothes, his lack of flashy accessories. Clearly, she thought he didn't belong. The gate attendant, sensing the rising tension, stepped in. "Ma'am, he is a first-class passenger," they said politely. But the woman wasn't convinced. Her brows furrowed as she pressed further, her voice louder now, drawing the attention of nearby travelers. "Are you sure?" she asked, her tone skeptical. "I've seen people try to cut the line before." Keanu raised his hand slightly, his voice gentle as he spoke for the first time. "It's all right," he said with a small, understanding smile. "Let her go ahead. I'll wait." The gesture was so calm, so gracious, that it caught everyone off guard. The woman hesitated for a moment, as if unsure how to respond. Then, without another word, she stepped forward, satisfied she'd maintained her perceived order. Keanu quietly stepped aside, his humility on full display. The people around him exchanged glances, a mix of surprise and discomfort. Some had recognized him, but even those who hadn't were struck by his composure. This wasn't just an ordinary encounter. It was the kind of moment that lingers in the back of your mind. And for those watching, the question remained, who was this man who handled the situation with such grace? And what would happen next? Keanu quietly boarded the plane after the woman, his calm demeanor unchanged. As he reached his seat in the first-class cabin, he greeted the flight attendants with a polite smile and placed his modest backpack in the overhead compartment. Meanwhile, the woman had already settled into her seat a row ahead of him, her designer bag taking up space in the seat beside her. She was flipping through a glossy magazine, seemingly unaware, or perhaps uninterested, in the moment that had just passed. The cabin buzzed softly with the murmur of passengers and the hum of the engines. Keanu, ever the picture of modesty, settled into his seat, pulled out a book, and began reading. But peace didn't last long. A few minutes later, the woman flagged down a flight attendant. Her tone was sharp, carrying an air of entitlement. "Excuse me," she said loudly. "It's uncomfortably warm in here. Can you do something about it?" The flight attendant nodded politely, offering to adjust the temperature, but her response only seemed to fuel the woman's dissatisfaction. Soon she was complaining about the seat cushion, the pre-flight drink selection, even the lighting. Other passengers exchanged uneasy glances, but no one said a word. Keanu, still focused on his book, remained unfazed, but not everyone had their eyes glued to the entitled woman. A young boy seated a few rows back gasped, his eyes widening in recognition. He nudged his dad excitedly. "Dad, that's Keanu Reeves," he whispered, his voice filled with awe. Keanu noticed the boy and offered him a small wave. The boy lit up, grinning from ear to ear. His dad smiled back at Keanu, mouthing a quiet, "Thank you." The exchange was brief but heartwarming, a stark contrast to the woman's ongoing complaints. The woman, however, caught the interaction out of the corner of her eye. She glanced back, her curiosity piqued. But after a quick glance at Keanu, she turned away, still seemingly unaware of his identity. She refocused her attention on the flight attendant, issuing yet another demand. As the plane took off, the contrast between Keanu's quiet humility and the woman's entitled attitude became more apparent. For those who recognized him, and even for those who didn't, it was clear that this was no ordinary traveler. The stage was set, and the true weight of the moment was yet to come. Mid-flight, the atmosphere in the cabin had settled into a calm rhythm. The attendants were serving meals, and Keanu, as always, was gracious and polite. When his tray was handed to him, he smiled warmly and said, "Thank you." His tone was sincere, and the simple gesture didn't go unnoticed. The young boy from earlier, still brimming with excitement, whispered to his dad, "Can we go say hi?" His dad hesitated for a moment before nodding. Together they approached Keanu. The father, clearly respectful, spoke softly. "Excuse me, Mr. Reeves. I'm sorry to bother you, but my son is a huge fan. Would it be all right to take a quick picture?" Keanu looked up, his face lighting up with a genuine smile. "Of course," he said, setting aside his book. He leaned down to the boy's level, shaking his hand. "What's your name, buddy?" he asked. The boy, now beaming, stammered, It's Jake." "Nice to meet you, Jake," Keanu said warmly. "Let's get that picture." As they posed, the boy's excitement was palpable, his grin stretching from ear to ear. The moment didn't go unnoticed by the other passengers, or the woman in the row ahead. She turned slightly, her eyes narrowing as she watched the interaction unfold. Her gaze shifted from the boy to Keanu, and something clicked. She froze for a moment, her magazine forgotten. Recognition washed over her face as she realized who she had dismissed earlier. Her expression turned from smug confidence to embarrassment. She shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her earlier behavior replaying in her mind. How could she have been so blind? And to someone like Keanu Reeves, no less, an actor celebrated not just for his movies, but for his humility and kindness. Keanu, however, seemed completely unaware, or perhaps unfazed by her reaction. After thanking the boy and his father, he returned to his seat, as calm and composed as ever. The woman kept glancing back at him, debating her next move. Should she say something? Apologize? The weight of her misjudgment settled heavily on her, but she wasn't sure how to proceed. The cabin was quiet, but the tension in her mind was deafening. She had made a mistake, and for the first time that day, she wasn't sure how to fix it. As the plane continued its journey, the woman grew increasingly restless. She kept glancing back at Keanu, her thoughts racing. How could she have been so wrong? She judged him based on appearances, made assumptions, and acted entitled, all without realizing she was speaking to one of the most respected actors in the world. Finally, as the plane began its descent, she couldn't take it any longer. With a deep breath, she turned around in her seat. Her voice, which had been sharp and confident earlier, was now soft and hesitant. "Excuse me," she began. Keanu looked up, his expression calm and welcoming, as if he had no recollection of her earlier behavior. I just wanted to say I'm sorry for what I said back at the gate. I didn't realize who you were." Keanu tilted his head slightly, a small smile forming on his lips. "It's all right," he said, gently. "You don't need to apologize. We all have moments." His response caught her off guard. It wasn't what she expected, and it left her feeling both relieved and humbled. She nodded, murmuring a quiet thank you, and turned back to her seat. For the rest of the flight, she remained quiet, her earlier energy replaced with introspection. Meanwhile, Keanu's attention shifted back to the young boy and his father. As they passed by to use the restroom, he reached into his bag and pulled out something special, a signed photo from one of his films. When they returned, Keanu handed it to Jake with a warm smile. "Thanks for saying hi earlier," Keanu said. "Here's a little something for you." Jake's eyes widened in disbelief. "Thank you so much," he exclaimed, clutching the photo as if it were a treasure. His father's gratitude was equally heartfelt, a simple, "Thank you, Mr. Reeves," spoken with sincerity. The interaction didn't just affect Jake and his dad, it was a ripple that touched everyone around them. Even the woman, still processing her earlier misjudgment, couldn't help but feel moved by the exchange. Keanu's ability to handle situations with kindness and humility was inspiring, and it left her questioning her own behavior. As the plane landed and passengers began gathering their belongings, Keanu stood up to help an elderly woman struggling with her overhead bag. The woman from earlier watched him silently, her embarrassment slowly transforming into admiration. She had made a mistake, but she had also witnessed something rare, a quiet strength and kindness that left a lasting impression. By the time the plane taxied to the gate, the woman knew she'd been taught an unspoken lesson. Kindness, humility, and grace weren't just admirable traits. They were powerful enough to change perspectives, and perhaps even lives. As the passengers disembarked, Keanu blended into the crowd as seamlessly as he had arrived. He walked with his usual quiet confidence, unbothered by the attention he'd subtly garnered on the flight. But the story didn't end there. A fellow passenger had captured parts of the journey on their phone. The young boy's excitement, the woman's eventual apology, and Keanu's calm, gracious demeanor. By the time Keanu reached his next destination, the video had already gone viral. The caption read, "Keanu Reeves shows why he's the kindest man in Hollywood." Social media erupted with praise, with fans and strangers alike sharing their admiration. "This is why we love Keanu," one comment read. Another said, "A reminder that kindness and humility can make all the difference." Thousands of similar sentiments poured in, showcasing the impact of a single moment of grace. The woman, too, saw the video. Watching herself through someone else's eyes was a humbling experience. She hadn't just judged Keanu, she had exposed her own biases. But instead of retreating into defensiveness, she chose to reflect. Inspired by Keanu's example, she made a small but meaningful gesture, an anonymous donation to a charity supporting underprivileged children, one she learned Keanu quietly supported. Keanu, unaware of the viral sensation or the woman's change of heart, continued with his day. For him, the events on the plane weren't extraordinary, they were simply a reflection of his values. But for those who witnessed the encounter, it was unforgettable. As Keanu sat at his next boarding gate, quietly reading once again, his phone buzzed with a message from his manager. "You're trending again," it read, accompanied by a link to the video. Keanu smiled slightly, shook his head, and returned to his book. Fame wasn't his goal, but knowing his actions inspired others was more than enough. And perhaps that's the greatest takeaway. In a world often filled with judgment and entitlement, Keanu Reeves reminded everyone that kindness and humility have the power to ripple far beyond the moment. With that said, thanks for watching, and until next time, like and subscribe for more inspiring videos.